Well, look who we have here. My name is Rook to me, and I am the Healy leader of this squad. We are but one of many squads that are being dispersed across this planet's surface to increase the influence and control of the Covenant. But we're not the only ones here. The planet's local inhabitants are a couple of Outlander factions and maybe some pig pirates, but we also have our sworn enemies, the UNSC, here as well. No doubt they'll surely try to impede on our progress to the great journey, but we won't let that happen. We're a standard squad that's being sent out with all the resources that you would come to expect. The only difference is that most squads have 3 Healy, and unfortunately somehow I've been paired with a Kigyar and an Ungoy. But our Forerunner gods have yet to forsaken me, and we shall do the best with what we currently have at our disposal, such as mining out a base here in the small hills of this volcanic region. As I'm sure you saw, we did land with quite a few resources, and thus one of our first orders of business is going to be building some proper storage to go about keeping those out of the elements and thus keeping them away from deterioration. And as we continue mining out our new home here, we are also going to be building ourselves some proper furniture, like some ergonomic beds. That way we're at least comfortable at night in our cold caverns. As for our power generation, for the time being we're going to be going with some simple power generation, that being a solar panel. Not exactly top tier Covenant technology, but we'll get around to it. This way, at the very least, we'll have some proper lighting inside our little base here, along with some auto doors. When the sun is up, that is. We need a battery, which we would end up building just alongside our new storage room. Late one evening, it would seem that one of the human Outlander factions have sent out a scout to see what had fallen from the stars. Unfortunately for this poor gentleman, we wouldn't be able to let him leave here alive after he discovered us. Ah, you poor little demon. Such a shame. You could have been our slave after all. Oh well, I'm sure there's plenty more humans where he came from anyhow. In the meantime, we are going to continue furthering our expansion of the base. This small little room that you see us mining out is actually going to be something of a growing room for crops, you could say. This beautiful little fungi is actually called a bliss cap and is a delicacy from the Ungoy homeworld before it was completely destroyed many a year ago. Not only is it edible, but it's also fun to eat. You'll see what I mean later. As for right now, we have a cluster of cargo pods crashing nearby. It would seem that our Forerunner gods have blessed us with some raccoon meat. Oh boy. The more that falls from the sky, the less we have to hunt on our own, giving us the opportunity to turn our attention elsewhere, like attempting to smooth the walls in this space to make it even more beautiful to our eyes. But it would seem that we have a raid from the parasite known as the Flood. Disgusting creatures. We had no idea that these parasites were on this planet as well, but luckily for us it would seem that there are only 2 infection forms coming to kill us. Luckily, Vekler's pinpoint accuracy, thanks to their jackal eyes, would allow us to turn those 2 infection forms into nothing more than green stains in the path. But I have no doubt that there are surely more to come. But while we're waiting on more of the infection to come for us to cleanse from this planet, we're actually going to be working on a nice little kitchen, dining room, as well as a food storage area. Now, I highly doubt that winter's going to be all that rough here in this volcanic area, as it stays pretty warm for the most part on most other planets like this region. But if we were to have a volcanic winter, on the other hand, things could be bad. Now that our base is set up for the most part, I thought it might be a good idea to take some of the money that we currently have, as well as some of the advanced medicines, out to one of our nearby outposts to do a little bit of trading. We would end up purchasing a beam rifle for Vekler. As you saw earlier, Vekler was a professional with a simple plasma pistol. Imagine what he can do with a real rifle. We're going to be mining out some of the nearby resources though for about a day or 2, as we're going to be using up a lot of steel, not only for many of our production devices, power generators, but also we're going to be using it for the flooring inside our base as well. You need to understand that on High Charity, most of the flooring seems to be some type of Covenant metal, and though this steel is not exactly up to par with our high-tech alien alloys, it'll have to do. But in case things get a little bit too depressing here, we do have our very first yield of this bliss cap, which we could cook into meals. This will significantly increase the mood of whoever eats it by quite a bit. The only issue with that is that it does make us just a little bit high, yeah. So we'll need to use it in certain situations only, when one of our soldiers is on the brink of madness, perhaps. Luckily, our growing room can also be repurposed for other types of fungi from other alien homeworlds, such as a stinker cap. This fungus, though very delectable when cooked into a meal, when it is growing smells like rotting flesh, so we probably won't be going in the growing room very often. We then received word of incoming transport pods falling just outside of our base. It would seem the UNSC now knows we're here. The first of their ODST soldiers bursting forth from a transport pod would meet our energy dagger. 2 more of them would engage in a firefight with us as they were taking cover near the pond behind some rock chunks. Of course, I would rush in with my dagger to begin stabbing one to death, and the other would die as well. And though they did end up harming our Kigyar just a tiny bit with some of their bullets, we were completely fine from the entire ordeal. As for one of these ODSTs, it would seem that we missed all the important parts when stabbing her with the energy dagger, and thus we decided to attempt to enslave her, as the Covenant will pay a pretty price for her head, or maybe we can force her to do some work around here. But until then, the majority of this work is going to still be reliant on us to complete, such as some tetrapod structures that we'll be able to take cover behind during raids and other forms of attacks. Eventually, though, we would finally end up enslaving the human, and of course, she's not all that great at most things, as most humans are not, but at the very least, we could let her do a little bit of hauling for us. And with that, my friends, it is finally day 25. We are a quarter of the way of completing our 100 days journey. But with it being a quarter of the way there, if you're familiar with the channel, you're also probably familiar with the fact that we do boss battles every 25 days. It would seem, my friends, that the UNSC has sent one of their specialized Spartan demons to try and eradicate us, equipped with some very interesting looking armor as well as a catastrophic spanker RPG. No doubt this is going to be hectic. As the UNSC's demon began to approach our base, we began to get into a defensive position, awaiting with our Jackal sniper. We would let the Spartan get near our entrance around our defenses. This may seem a bit foolish at first, but this was to try to corner him. We would spring out from behind and begin sniping at this Spartan, as well as sending Rook to me in with his energy dagger, but he wouldn't even get the chance to try and slice the Spartan open, as a plasma blast had finally finished him. Though it must be said that taking down one of the UNSC's finest did not come without its cost. Rook to me damn near lost his life when he took a bit of shrapnel from a rocket blast landing near him. If this were a direct hit, we would have been missing a leader. As his reward for surviving, though, we would allow him to extract the skull of this Spartan. Something of a souvenir, you could say, to increase morale, especially when we decided to put it on a spike in the middle of our base. Speaking of the base, I feel that it's time for a proper expansion. We are going to be digging a little bit to the north here, and we're actually going to be digging out more bedrooms that we plan on using as prison cells and or slave quarters and or residential quarters, just depending which comes first. We then ended up receiving word from one of our leaders that they were willing to give us some unique items, in this case a special shield, if we were willing to take on plenty of their waste packs from some of their machinery, so of course we humbly accepted. The waste packs would arrive shortly thereafter, and as would our reward, which we ended up giving to Vekler. This shield not only has a ominous, intimidating red aura about it, but also the best part about it is that it actually allows the wearer to fire a range ranged weapon while inside. Perfect for a Kigyar sniper, given that Veclor is quite frail, if we're being honest. We spent a little bit of time beautifying the portions of the base that we've recently dug out, as well as adding in some extra solar power generation. And as the base continues to grow, and as does our little platoon and or squad, you could call it here, we are going to need an expansion onto our storage room. Then for a little bit of time, we would actually spend a few days solely focused on mining out some of the valuable resources in this region. The reason being is because we plan on taking it to our higher ups for a little bit of a reward. Though trading while traveling on foot, especially with such heavy minerals, takes a little bit of time, so we'll check back in on that in a moment. Besides, as for right now, we need to mine out yet another section of the base. I'm sure you're probably getting sick of that by this point, but in particular, this little room is actually going to be our researching laboratory. And this also ties back in with why we're actually taking our rare minerals out for a bit of trading, as we need plasteel and gold for our multi-analyzer. Sometime later, once we had finally returned home with these brand new resources, we could quickly throw together said multi-analyzer, and we were now good to go to start researching some proper Covenant technology that will unlock plenty of different types of weapons and also is a prerequisite for more advanced Covenant tech. But until we finally unlock this advanced technology, for now our security is going to be relying on some very primitive technology. Humans are not all that intelligent, so no doubt many of them will step on these spike traps. At one point I noticed that we were being raided, and interestingly enough they had a Sangheili along with him. It would seem that there is a heretic afoot. However, as we were coming out to fight the Shrieking Fools, some of the local Covenant military, a jackal with a plasma pistol in this instance, actually managed to down one of them, and the heretic decided to flee like a coward. That's such a shame. We had so much that we had hoped to show him, like his own insides. But nevertheless, all heretics shall pay for their, well, heresy. For the time being, though, we are going to be improving the bedrooms of our own soldiers within the squad, and we're also going to be throwing out a few recreational items, such as a piano, which, yes, I'll admit, is quite strange for a bunch of aliens. We then received holy word from our prophets about a batch of resources that were landing nearby our base, and a couple of factions were heading that way. We had hoped to try to beat them there if possible, but for obvious reasons, trekking through these mountains was going to be a long and treacherous journey. Or so we thought, until we were ambushed. Filthy human outlanders. But among their ranks once more was the exact same heretic who had tried to attack us not too many days before at our own base. Oh, you poor pathetic fool, I'm afraid that there will be no more escape for you and your blasphemy this time. We caught the heretic and his compadre attempting to make their way around us through some type of cave system. Luckily for us, we're not as foolish as they wish we were. After easily stabbing the human to death, the heretic would then meet our blade. But as he lay on the ground in a pool of his own purple blood, we thought perhaps there is some type of reform in this Sangheili. He's not human after all, so there's at least some chance. After tending to his wounds, we decided to take him along with us to this resource area. We would leave he and our human slave in the loving hands and care of our Ungoi Glipnok. He won't be afraid to send a piece of plasma right through their skulls if they give him any lip. And with that, we would begin approaching the crash site of said resources, at which point we were being hounded by a bunch of Scyther mechanoids who were pretty easily slashed in half by the old dagger, and now it would seem that these resources are all ours. But the question remains, what do we do with all this useless shit? Well, it's not exactly useless, but to us, the Covenant, we don't plan on taking any of these human-made drugs or anything, so I think we'll take them back to a nearby base to be studied, and that way we can also reap the benefits in terms of silver and maybe even a few weapons. But as those of you with a keen eye are surely to notice, not only did we end up getting weapons, but we also have a new soldier to the squad, a Hanai miner. Miner being their rank. I promise you that they're old enough to be a soldier, okay? Not only would they be old enough to be a soldier though, but they would also be the perfect soldier to go about researching our Covenant technology, as their intelligence was much higher than any other, which is uncommon for this alien race, but nevertheless. A bit of time later, and some of the local rebel factions were about to have an all-out brawl and battle right here in our region with Covenant soldiers. Oh, those poor, dumb sons of bitches. As I'm sure you probably could have guessed, a caveman would have had a better chance at stopping an asteroid by throwing dust at it. Our soldiers ran through these poor bastards like, I don't know, hot knife through butter. They all died, okay? Every single human died. And our allies would even end up taking many of their weapons and whatever else that they could find from them to either sell on the black market to other rebels to try and help uproot the UNSC presence on this planet, or for whatever else they wanted, I suppose. But with that, my friends, it is finally day 50. That's right, we're halfway through this little journey, but that also means that we have yet another boss battle. It would seem that the UNSC has sent yet another Spartan after us, a master sniper warrior, along with a squad of ODSTs, some of their own other elite warriors, though not quite Spartans, of course. In preparation for this attack, we would send Vekler out into position to begin a counter-sniper operation. The Spartan would end up getting a bullet or two in at Vekler, but thanks to his shield, he would survive and even manage to kill the Spartan. I was not expecting this so easily and so quickly. Although that being said, we did have an entire squad of ODSTs to take on, which managed to knock down our Ungoy, but luckily he got back up pretty quickly and was able to help us strafe around and try to flank them while they were inside their bubble shield, which ended up working, and as the last remaining ODST attempted to flee, we would chase them down. Well, that was quite the bloodbath, eh? I suppose that I may have underestimated just how strong our own squad has become when putting together this boss battle. But either way, we still get to reap the rewards, which is going to be yet another human slave in the form of one of the ODSTs, and yet another Spartan skull for our trophy room. Ah, it does sit so nicely in there, doesn't it, next to our first. And while we're talking about the base once more, it's time for everybody's favorite segment, more mining. I'm sorry, if you don't like this, there's really not all that much I can do, as we are technically under a mountain, but we are actually going to be mining out and installing a communications room. Not only will this allow us to communicate with our higher-up zealots, and even those with the prophets, of course, with what's going on here at our base, but we'll also be able to communicate with any orbital traders, which will surely come in handy. You see, I have a little surprise project in mind for not only you, the viewer, but also for all the members of our squad, but it is going to require a lot of resources, so I'll surprise you with it later. This new little surprise project, though, is going to require a lot of room, and thus we are going to be opening up the base even more so, which unfortunately would be interrupted when we had a pretty decent-sized group of man-hunting wargs who had entered the area. Lucky enough for us, though, wargs just so happen to be even dumber than humans, even if just slightly, meaning that it was quite easy for us to end up killing them all, which was pretty great, as this meant more meat for the freezer. And while we took some time to butcher up all the dead wargs, we would also have Glimnock go about making some new weapons. These ended up only being some plasma pistols along with a needler, but the best part about these weapons is that we made them all on our own. We didn't have to go out and trade with any of the other Covenant outposts, which tend to charge a little bit more than we would like. To test out these new weapons, we decided to send out our reformed heretic, Glibnock himself, as well as BB, the Jerohanai, to a nearby Outlander mining site. Word around the grapevine is that they're packing plenty of plasteel here, and based on how many soldiers we see in the distance, I would bet that that is true. Under the cover of night and shadows, we began to sneak right along the outer walls of this mining area until we ended up reaching its inhabitants in the innermost part, and though they did attempt to put up a decent fight, I'm afraid that it was all in vain. Not only would essentially every single human here, except for maybe one of them, end up dying in a pool of their own blood with needler bolts sticking out of them, but we would also end up taking every last bit of their plasteel, and believe me, there was plenty of it. So much, in fact, that it would actually take us several trips to get it back home. So, for a few days while we were doing all this hauling, we were also sending out trade caravans to purchase things like gold, and also to make a little bit of silver for ourselves for our special project that I had mentioned. This project also required plenty of steel as well, and I suppose I could stop teasing you, couldn't I? We're actually mining out a section here that's going to be a hangar bay for our spirit dropship. That is right, our very own ship for the entire squad. Oh, Nelly, ain't she a beaut, baby? That was a trick question. Of course she is. Here's hoping she comes in handy for day 75. That's right, 3/4 of the way there, and as you know, yet another boss battle. You see, I was a bit self-conscious about the boss battle for day 50 being way too easy and us being way too strong, and so for 75, I thought a gigantic-ass raid of the Flood would more than suffice, and boy was I right, as you'll see in a moment. At first, I thought the dropship would be absolutely perfect for this raid, because if we flew it close enough to the ground, we could technically run over the Flood with pretty minimal damage to the ship itself, but unfortunately, it seems that we've underestimated its size, and we can't get it out the garage door, or levitate and launch out of the map and back into the map, and anyways, this is a fight we're going to have on foot, which was not ideal at all. As you can see, the Flood infection forms were easily pushing us back into our hangar bay, slamming the garage door behind us. Many of them had slipped in and we managed to kill them. However, Look to Me, screaming in an agonizing pain, was infected by the Flood, quickly turning and quickly dying by our own hands. By the gods, the parasite just continues to take and take and take until there's nothing left. By this point, the entire base was becoming completely surrounded by the parasite. There was no way for us to escape. Our one and only true option here was going to be to fight our way out, holding doors wide open as we did, trying to pull the Flood back towards the hangar bay, a much more open and wider space where we could try to take them on. Not only that, but we also found this method of fighting quite useful for spreading out the parasite into smaller groups instead of taking on the entire pack of them at once. This process was proving to be quite effective, although there were still many of the parasite forms on the outside of the base that we would have to go outside to deal with. Slinging the garage doors wide open, rushing out into the pouring rain, we engaged with the monstrous parasites, firing upon them with our plasma weaponry, burning what little skin, I suppose you could call it, that they had left of their hosts. And eventually, after many an hour of fighting and cleansing this area of them, we were victorious. But I know that this battle was far from over. The parasite will be back, and most definitely in much larger numbers. But for now, I suppose we'll cherish what we can of this victory, even though it had come at a very great personal cost for us. Our base now littered with the corpses of these monstrosities, and Rook to Me dead. But he, as our captain, our leader, made the great sacrifice that any of us would for the great journey. The eternal sacrifice, as it were. I like to think that now he is wandering the great unknown with our forerunner gods. Since his earthly vessel has been tainted by the parasite, we would use some human grenades, because it's all we had on hand, to go about destroying the corpse. Now with the threat neutralized, at least for the time being, we're going to focus on some power production once more to get our lights back on in the form of some toxifier generators. Previously, we didn't want to taint this world, but with the parasite already here, I'd say in the very near future we'll be glassing it into nothingness, so it really doesn't matter. We would end up spending quite a bit of time after getting our lights and power flowing back through the base, cleaning it up and also rebuilding a few different pieces of the wall and doing repairs to things like our cooler and food storage area, just getting us back into operational shape. We would also often send out small squads and individuals to go about hunting down the remaining infected wildlife in the area from the parasite. We would also bring these corpses back home and dissect them. Now I do realize this might seem dangerous and or a bit odd, but these flood spores are actually absolutely perfect for study. And the more we study them, the more weaknesses we can find out about them. Plus, the higher-ups end up giving us a good bit of silver in exchange for bringing them these specimens. We would also be able to exchange some of these flood spores for some new weaponry, such as a blood energy sword blade and a brute shot. That's basically the name, but I digress. These weapons will help us out quite a bit if we were to encounter the parasite once more, as well as the UNSC, or anyone else really. We were also sure to do a bit of mining in our hangar bay to make our entrance much larger, allowing our spirit dropship to come and go as it pleases without having to launch in and out of the map. As we saw earlier when the flood had attacked us on day 75, we can't just launch out of the map and back into the same map, so we were kinda screwed, but no more. But the ship realistically is only going to be good for running over enemies and also for a quick getaway. We need to make some proper defenses in the form of a couple of shade turrets. I would have happily ended up making many more, but they were extremely expensive in terms of resources, so this was about the best we could do for now. Speaking of resources, we also ended up having a bulk goods trader come from the Covenant itself, where we would end up purchasing some plasteel, and we would also end up doing the same with the Orbital Traders Hub as well. We began a little stockpile of it. The reason being is because we needed it for our advanced barriers that we could use for cover, much better than the tetrapod structures that we have been using. As for our normal stockpile of steel, we planned on using it to create a proper floor of metal plates in the hangar bay. That way we don't have any issues with landing and takeoff. I also noticed that we had some type of group of human children in the hangar bay who were begging for money or medicine or something. I don't really know. We ended up running them over. Sorry about that, kiddos. Right place, the right time, depending on who you ask, that is. At one point, it would seem that some jackal pirates were in a bit of a space battle in orbit around the planet with the Covenant, and thus we had a bunch of ship chunks falling all around us, as well as a few escape pods. A little frightening, as there was the possibility that a ship chunk would land inside our base, crushing one of us, but thankfully that never happened. Interestingly enough, though, one of these escape pods actually contained a skirmisher who wasn't on the brink of death and, well, would only die in a few hours, so we ended up taking them in and attempting to recruit them and show them the light of the great journey. Eventually, they were on our side. Thankfully, given their species, they were already quite familiar with our plasma weaponry, and they even brought their very own shield. Far from the perfect soldier, as they're still a fragile and pathetic Kigyar species, but they are pretty quick on their toes, so that's a plus. Sometime later, and we would end up receiving word of two factions warring in a nearby region. We decided that we would actually head out there in case there were any useful resources or items that we might be able to collect. Upon our arrival, we would then soon discover that it was the UNSC fighting with the parasite. Obviously, we decided not to get involved, as letting our enemies kill one another was a much more suitable solution, you could say. but the parasite would easily overwhelm them, and what remained of their marines would flee the area. They didn't really have all that many resources that we were interested in, other than some of their drugs, which our scientists could study and we would make some money on, and they also had plenty of food. We would eventually return home with some of this food, but we were quickly going to be heading out once more, as the leader of the Outlanders actually wanted to speak with us in a nearby area to possibly discuss a deal of peace. We were hoping to maybe turn them against the UNSC and our other enemies, but after arriving, it would seem that we did more damage with this conversation than good. Turns out they don't want to bend to the will of the Covenant, although I suppose this means that they will eventually have to fall to the Covenant. However, all these trade missions and peace talks and everything else that we're flying for has left the dropship's gas tank a little dry at the moment, so we started refining plenty of fuel for quite a while to go about filling it back up. And once it was full, we were also stockpiling quite a bit to use for our defenses. As I'm sure you're well aware, chem fuel is extremely flammable, and that also means that if we were to maybe put it in some steel barrels lining out the borders of our entrances into the base, and we were to maybe shoot it with a hot plasma beam, it would explode, and thus why we're going to be doing exactly that for our Day 100 boss battle. That's right, folks, we finally made it. 100 days as the Covenant. But now the real question is, will we make it to see 101 days? Let's find out. We are going to be facing down, quite literally, the largest raid of UNSC troops that we have ever seen. And among their ranks are Marines, ODSTs, and the notorious Spartan 2s, who are all packing some major heat. As they were funneling through the narrow mountains, we began trying to fire at our chem fuel barrels, and of course at as many of these soldiers as humanly possible. But they were easily overwhelming us, and we would need to make a retreat. Mothan would attack a Spartan 2 in hand-to-hand combat with his Bloodblade energy sword, but would easily be smacked to the ground by a rocket launcher as the others were attempting to flee as well, crawling for their lives even. It would seem that our defeat here at this outpost was inevitable, but things were about to get even worse for all of us. The parasite had arrived to join in on the chaotic battle. As they approached our base, our enslaved humans would rush to the dropship to try and get the hell out of here, running over many of their fellow humans from the UNSC in the process. But eventually, they would finally escape, bringing this battle and Day 100 to a close. The UNSC and the parasite were still locked in a bit of a battle as they were fleeing the area. But I think this is where our story ends, my friends. I hope you've enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.